My name's Dewayne Hendricks. This is the 6th Detroit Maker Faire, and I've given a talk at every Maker Faire, so this is my 6th talk. I like to talk on different subjects. This year I'm talking about the internet. So the internet is one of those words that, to use that classic phrase from the Princess Bride, you know, it's like the internet. I don't think that word means what you think it means, okay? Because it means something, I think, quite different to me than it means to you or several of you, and that if we had a sort of like try to reach a consensus as to what the internet is, I think it would be difficult to do that, all right? I'm 65. I may not look 65, but I'm 65. So basically, I came up using the ARPANET, which was a precursor to the internet. I started using that in the mid-70s at Southern Illinois University. And so I've been there through the gestation of this internet thing. The commercial internet that we know, where it went from research to being available to regular people, started in 1995. So that's 20 years. So look what's happened in 20 years and how the internet, whatever that is, has reshaped our society. I remember giving a talk in Washington, D.C. in 1994. And it was to a bunch of policymakers, and I was talking about what I was making predictions about what this internet thing was going to do, because it was, going to become commercially available. And I said it would change the world as we know it, And so what I got was a lot of pushback from the policymakers in D.C. because it was like, well, it's just this research thing, it's not going to really catch on, and all this negative stuff about it. And like 3 years later, it was like email addresses started becoming, it's like you were a nobody unless you had an email address, just in 1997, okay? And then think about that 5-year push from 95 to 2000. And those of you who are awake, saw really significant changes, okay? And then we had the big, Wall Street bust in 2000, with all these virtual stocks or virtual companies, all right? So now we've had another 15 years for this thing to set in. So what I want to do is to sort of start out by telling you, to me, what the internet was, because I grew up with it, and how it's no longer that, and what we've all lost as a result. And then what I want to do is take you in a walk through the past and show you how the telegraph system of the 19th century was like the internet of today, and how the telephone system of the 19th century was like the internet of today, and how the radio broadcasting system of the early 20th century was like the internet of today, along a number of really interesting salient, descriptors, or shared attributes between these different communications infrastructures, okay? So the internet is a communications infrastructure. So early on, the internet graybeards, the idea was that you had a lot of different computer systems that had different architectures. So you wanted to have a way to connect those up and have them all communicate, all right? So this set of protocols, actually a protocol suite, something called TCP/IP. The TCP is Transmission Control Protocol, and IP is Information Protocol. And there are a bunch of specs that define what it essentially defines packets and how packets are moved from one place to another over some physical infrastructure, okay? But it's known in technical terms as the TCP/IP protocol suite. So there are thousands of protocols that make up this suite, which is what the internet is to me, okay? It's a suite of protocols that allow you to do boundless things. So to most of you people, the internet to you is the World Wide Web, okay? That's pretty much it, all right? and you may use VoIP, which is another set of protocols, or other sort of application-ish things that shapes your view of what this internet thing is. But today, a lot of you are in what we call stacks, in that you're in the Google stack, you're in the Facebook stack, and you get the idea in that these companies, essentially, you're in the Twitter stack. They shape your daily view. You spend a lot of time in these environments, and they tell you that they give you access to the internet, but they don't. So getting back to what the internet means to me, the suite of protocols is that we wanted to have a mechanism to allow communication between two endpoints that was unbounded, would allow any possible type of communication between two endpoints, and that the endpoints would negotiate what kind of conversation they wanted to have, okay? So the technical term is that you would peer with someone, peering, okay? And you would peer with someone you trusted, okay? Trust. And one of the fun, it's like it was called the end-to-end principle. And that's one of these parts of that TCP/IP protocol suite. There's a set of documents that describe the end-to-end protocols, all right? Well, the funny thing is that the notion of peering was weeded out of the internet that you have access to, okay? In that it started around 2000, in that there used to be thousands of internet service providers. From 1995 to that period to 2000, there were thousands of internet service providers. There was competition. We're using the telephone infrastructure to basically connect connect people to the internet. You would dial in, okay, you had a dial-up modem, and you dial into the internet. And you had your pick of internet service providers. After 2000, a lot of those people disappeared. Until now, we just have most of the people in this country access the internet through a few service providers. Comcast, Time Warner, AT&T, but a very few, not thousands, just a few, okay? Comcast is the biggest internet provider in the United States, okay? And they do not give you the internet. They don't. Because they do not allow you to have this unrestricted two-way communications, okay? You can go out, but I can't get to you, okay? If I want to have an unstructured asynchronous communication with you, I can't because I don't have your address, okay? The internet was designed so that people all had access to routable addresses. The thing that you have, basically, you have an address, but it's not two-way. So if you wanted to run apps that would do peer-to-peer, you couldn't. Now, you don't know that, I'm telling you that, and you might say, well, I can do the World Wide Web, what do I need peering for? I mean, what is what you're talking about going to allow me to do that I can't already do? Which is a good question. Well, the problem we face here is that when something has been cut from what was the fundamental design and architecture of the internet, so you can't get at it, people like me couldn't write the applications to avail ourselves of those capabilities. And that's sort of what we've gotten to today with the stacks, okay? So right now I'm an internet service provider to people, and I give the people that are my customers what's called a routable address. So that means we can all peer with each other if we choose to do so. What you get from Comcast, you're behind a firewall, okay? You get what's called a dynamic address. So it changes, it's not the same, okay? So it's like, I want to send a piece of mail to you, and it's like, I give it to the post office, and the post office comes back and says, well, there's nobody there because they moved, okay? And that's what's happening when you use the internet from people like Comcast, right? There's no peering. So, what I want to do now is to go to the 19th century and walk around that a bit, because there are certain attributes of this internet thing that what I want to show you is how that the communications infrastructures of the past evolved in such a way that they looked, when they looked a lot like what we have today, and they faced some of the same problems that we have today. And what I want to try to do towards the end of the talk now is sort of say, here's what happened to these other communications infrastructures. And it looks like the internet is going in the same direction. So what do we do? What do you want to do? I mean, it's like you've heard the fight for net neutrality. We'll talk about that a little bit in terms of what net neutrality is and what it isn't. So let's go back to the 1830s, the dawn of the telegraph. Okay, now this is a place to talk about. The Henry Ford, symbolizes the industrial age, and the telegraph was certainly a part of that. Because prior to the telegraph, the fastest way man could communicate was a wind-driven ship across the oceans and the fastest running animal, okay? That was it, all right? So once the telegraph line got laid, we went from foot speed to light speed, okay? Along the course of that wire, which wasn't necessarily a large distance, we went from foot speed to light speed. So what happened as the telegraph got deployed was that it changed society tremendously. And the difference is that since you guys were born, you've basically been with light speed all the time. You haven't seen foot speed, and you have no idea what a society was like when communications was limited to foot speed, okay? All right? You have no idea, all right? So casting, it's like, so even, you may see movies and stuff about that period, but it doesn't really accurately represent it. But they went through a thermal shock, when that technology got implemented and got more pervasive, okay? Everything had to change. The way business was being done changed, okay? Pretty much overnight. But it was slow because the thing was about the early telegraph is that although it was there and worked, it wasn't widely accessible, okay? It wasn't affordable, okay? So there was a limit as to how many people made use of it. But what happened is we went through the 19th century, it became more accessible and more affordable, and more people used it. But here's the thing about the early telegraph. There wasn't just one telegraph company, all right? There were lots of telegraph companies. It was innovation. A lot of people the technology was new. People had, hey, if we do this, we can send the spark differently and whatever. If the wire size is this, okay. So there was a lot of innovation in a short period of time. There were hundreds of telegraph companies. And so what they realized was that if you wanted to get a message from, say, Baltimore to Washington, okay, you might have to go through several telegraph companies, all right? So what they had to do was sit down and agree to a suite of protocols, okay? So they could take a message and take it from one company to another by relay, okay? It had to be by common agreements. So you see, they faced the same kind of problem that the people that designed the internet of today, they faced it first in the 19th century. Same set of problems. So they agreed on the suite of protocols, and it worked. And messages could be sent long distances through multiple telegraph companies, okay? But look, economically what happened was, over time, consolidation, okay? Telegraph companies started being acquired, and so what happened is we drifted through the 19th century, it became Western Union, okay? So competition to monopoly, right? That's what happened with the telegraph, okay? So let's go a little bit further into the end of the 19th century, the telephone. Okay, Now, the difference with the telephone was that, from the telegraph, is that you had to go to a telegraph office, and there was a middleman, okay? And you pay this guy some money, and they send your message, okay? And they were responsible for the transport getting to wherever you wanted the message to go. But there was a middleman, all right? Well, there was this telephone thing, and it was different in that you could say, I want to talk to my Aunt Mabel, okay? And it would happen. And it would happen in real time. The telegraph wasn't real time for most people, okay? In that you put the message in the system, and eventually it would get delivered. The telephone was immediate, all right? Significant difference. And that significant difference changed society again, okay? So they had already made the transition to light speed, but now it was that the communications medium was more under your control. There was still a middleman, but basically when you wanted to call Aunt Mabel, you could do it if you had the money, okay? All right. But again, there wasn't just one telephone company. There were lots of telephone companies. So what did they have to do? Well, they had to make an agreement on a suite of protocols so that your call could go from whatever company to the other company and whatever to get to Aunt Mabel, all right? Suite of protocols. So this historian by the name of Tom Standage wrote a book a few years ago called The Victorian Internet. The Victorian Internet, because that was the 19th century was the Victorian age, maybe not over here, but across the pond. And what Standish did was like what I'm telling you is say, here's these common characteristics from the internet of today and these other communications infrastructures, okay? They face I have this bill that was in a committee in the US Congress in 1854 that reads like it's like if you didn't see the date on this bill and you read it, it was like it was a document that was produced today in our Congress, okay? And it was about these two guys, these entrepreneurs basically wanted to get money from the government to build a transcontinental telegraph that was going to be buried underground, okay? The wires would be underground all the way across the country, all right? Because they felt that was the safest way to go. Because how many have you seen some Hollywood Western where the Indians cut the telegraph wire, okay? All right? Well, their system wouldn't have allowed that. So this was 1854. So what happened was, so they tried to sell it. And it was revolutionary at the time because they got a lot of pushback from the conventional telegraph companies, of course, because it was like, well, we got all this infrastructure around, and this burying stuff is radical, it costs too much money, yada, 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 okay? So the Civil War basically derailed that whole effort. It never got funded, you never heard about it. But this bill, you read it, it's just like, wow. Until it starts talking about the technology, it reads just like something could happen today, all right? So I talked about the telephone, suite of protocols. Radio, okay? First transatlantic broadcast was I think it was like 1901, Marconi, all right? So, in a short period of time, wireless came into view, okay? Big time. It revolutionized the society again because unlike the telephone and the telegraph, there was no wires. It cost money to lay wires, okay? So if you wanted to talk to point A from B, you just do it, all right? So in a very short period of time, you had people trained to become wireless operators. So some of those people that were telegraph operators and telephone operators became wireless operators. Ships at sea were equipped with wireless, okay? And so the infrastructure got built, and again, there were middlemen in that if you wanted to send a message over wireless, you go to some office and they would do it. In that you didn't have, unlike the telephone, you didn't have direct real-time way to talk to your party that you wanted to communicate with, right? But again, what happened with the wireless is that there were a lot of wireless companies, okay? And then they got pruned, and then there was consolidation, and there were just a few. And you had like, you know, the networks like CBS, NBC, okay? All right, so to summarize the 19th century and the early 20th, lots of companies, lots of competition, consolidation around the technology. It becomes more accessible, more affordable, and the monopoly comes in, and basically there's no competition, and you pay what they tell you to pay, okay? All right, now, the internet starts to come around, and that pretty much the 20th century until the internet came around was pretty much the same, okay? In that you now had a way to do two-way communications, okay, with no middleman. That's a significant difference between the internet and telegraphy and telephones and wireless, okay, or radio broadcasting, okay? If you want to talk to Aunt Mabel, you do it in real time. No middleman. So there was a lot of potential there for a new economic structure for this. But what's happened is that we've had similar consolidation that we saw with those other three communications infrastructures, okay? And that we have just a few number of access providers, Comcast being the biggest, okay? And if you don't like Comcast, tough. You got no choice, right? So you're not really getting the internet as it was designed, okay? But should you really care? So for the rest of the talk, I've sort of gone through the, you know, I think you've got the affordability, accessibility, the monopolistic aspects of what happens to these communications infrastructures. So what I want to try to do now is look at this internet thing and see whether or not we can fall out of this, and that is it possible now to restructure this internet to get back to what it was at the beginning, okay? And to do that, there has to be sort of a new infrastructure, okay? Comcast, they're a cable company. They use wires, okay? So what changed the game between the telephone and the telegraph was wireless, that you don't lay wires with wireless. I mean, infrastructure goes up like that. So you all have cell phones, smartphones, and you have access to the internet thing through them, okay? And it's all wireless, and there's no infrastructure you see, okay? But there's an infrastructure that's in place that had to be built, you see. So here's the thing to think about. How many of you own your own Wi-Fi access point? Come on, come on. You know, it's in your home, you know, all right? Yeah, all right? Here's the fundamental difference here, in that unlicensed communications that got allowed by the FCC in 1985 means that for the first time, regular people could transmit whenever they wanted to, okay? And look at how Wi-Fi has changed commerce in this country, all over the world, Wi-Fi, all right? Because you essentially don't realize it, but what you have there is customer-owned or user-owned infrastructure. You all own those access points, and they're connected to an internet service provider, but you're broadcasting to your neighborhood, okay? So if you didn't lock your access point down and essentially made it like a public hotspot, all right, other people could make use of it, all right? But you've been scared and intimidated to not do that because some bad guy could get onto your access point and do pornography or whatever the hell, okay, all right? So now there are ways to deal with that, which is that, you know, there's this common carrier law, which Comcast doesn't worry about. People do porn over Comcast. It's like, we're a common carrier. Well, we're not responsible, okay? So legally, you could be made not responsible, but that, leave that, but okay. But you see, you own the infrastructure. You see, that's the big difference now. You're enabled, but you don't know it. In that you could create, and people have done this, they have created their own internet, their alternate internet infrastructure, okay? By opening up their access points. This is done in Europe, okay? Where they've been more conducive to this concept of this user-owned infrastructure. So they operate under this all for one, one for all. So I pay for my internet connection, but I share it with you, and when I go out and about, I can use yours or whoever. We're all in this together, okay? You see? So now you bypass the monopolies, right? The Internet Protocol Suite allows you to do this. And this thing called unlicensed communications that the FCC allowed in 1985 makes that legal. So, see, that's the difference. That's the difference between what happened in the 19th century and most of the 20th century, okay? But what's happened, though, is that it's all about knowledge. And what you don't know, all right? So you don't know you have this power, and you don't know that the internet could be a lot more than what they tell you the internet is, okay? You can create it, and you've heard of this thing. How many of you heard of something called the Darknet? The Darknet is this alternate internet that the implication there is that there's a lot of illegal stuff going on in the Darknet. But like the word internet, again, I don't think that word means what you think it means, okay? Because to me, the Darknet is basically a place where you can do peer-to-peer, where you do the real primitive form or the original form of the internet, okay? I use the Darknet all the time because I have a bunch of apps that do peer-to-peer, okay? So you've heard this thing about net neutrality and fighting for net neutrality. We want to make things equal playing field and stuff. To me, that was gone around 2000. In that I would have my own internet network as an internet service provider, but when I travel on business and stay at a hotel, I would find that my peer-to-peer apps no longer worked, okay? Because the internet service provider was blocking various TCP/IP ports, okay? So to me, this net neutrality fight was just rubbish because to me, the neutral internet, that horse left the barn, got on a ship, crossed the ocean, is living somewhere in Europe, okay? A long time ago, all right? And you don't know this, and I'm here to tell you that. And there are people like me that are out waving our arms and saying, look, you know, you have a lot more power than you think you do because you own access points. And with the right software, with the right attitudes, you can form your own neighborhood internet, and you can potentially peer with people that you trust, or not, okay? But I don't think a lot of you are really happy with Comcast, okay? And, you know, we all bitch and moan about it, or I'm just using them as the whipping boy for this talk. But you see the problem when you have a monopoly and the government's sort of in on it, which, yes. So what do you do? What do you do as a citizen when you've got this really, this internet thing that which has revolutionized the way we do commerce in our societies globally, all right? And it could do so much more. It could change the forms of government. You know, like to talk about voting online, all right? Hey, why do we have to go to a polling place? Look at Oregon. They figured it out. All right, so look, my half hour is about done, so I'm going to just open the floor for questions. If anybody has a few questions, go ahead, have at it.
When you say that we have Comcast and we also have Detroit, we cannot create a neighborhood without paying to that wholesale dealer.
Well, what happens, what they do in Europe is that you can bond connections. So you pay for a certain, upstream, downstream speed, okay? But the thing is, when you start bonding these things together, you have a lot of aggregate bandwidth. That's how the Darknet works. Everybody brings their bandwidth to the table, okay? All right? You've heard of BitTorrent?
Yeah.
All right? Well, it's that idea because basically when somebody wants to share a file, okay, using BitTorrent, what happens is that they seed it. And then a lot of people start getting pieces of it and they start to see it. So all of a sudden you get this aggregate, you get like, trillions of megabits on a real popular thing, aggregate bandwidth. And that's how it can work. But you see, that involves cooperation. You see, as long as you want to be this, an island into of yourself, then that's what you have.
So are there portals out there which, like BitTorrent, which increase or enhance your browsing speed?
Well, by using BitTorrent, the implication is you're sharing. Okay, you've agreed to cooperate because that's the way it works.
It's only to download the files, really. It's not to use the...
Oh, no, but you see, there's a lot of other things you can do with BitTorrent than just files. You see, and that's the whole thing that you're not aware of, and that there's all these peer-to-peer apps that use that basic concept to do all types of things, to do chat, okay, for instance. Sure.
So, like you progressed through telegraph, telephone, and to the internet, do you have any innovative extrapolation of this, like what do you think is going to be the next step? Like two bits from your side.
Well, how has the telegraph sort of went away, the telephone's still there, but it's frozen, okay, in time, okay? Radio broadcasting, television, is frozen, okay? So, and the internet is becoming frozen because you're getting captured by these stacks, all right? So that's the future unless you change it. You citizens, you change it. Because you have the capability. The technology is there to change it. But the monopolists are not going to change it. Okay, is that? Yes?
So there's been legislation about how the internet would be regulated closer to a utility like water or power. Does that make us so we have more opportunities to kind of go in this direction you're recommending or not?
Well, in Europe, it sort of works in a lot of countries because you have multiple internet service providers, and they are providing the real internet, and that you get what's called a routable address, okay? But here, there are no moves to do that. So we're falling behind the rest of the developed world because of our, we used to lead, we created the internet, but now we're falling behind. And that, you can get a gigabit in South Korea or Japan for, $10 for a gigabit. Now, today. What is a gigabit? I mean, Comcast is charging for a gigabit now. They just started offering a gigabit service. It's like $500 a month, okay? See what I mean?
You spoke about this evolution, the telegraph, telephone, internet. Do you think that this evolution happens because of this monopolistic behavior, because it incentivizes people to disrupt the industry, so therefore, in a sense, monopolistic behavior is good?
No, I didn't want to imply. What happened was there was a lot of innovation, and then it got funneled down into no more innovation because capitalism implies control, in that you want to monetize your investments. Okay, so you don't want disruption. Okay, so you want the same thing because look at what Comcast is doing. Okay.
In a sense, it's good that this actually will spur people to disrupt.
Well, what happens is, like, for people like me, if I wanted to do an internet startup, which actually I'm doing now, okay, I formed a startup here a few months ago with 3 other people, where we're going to use radio to do a secure internet, okay, where you build it from the ground up, okay, and we'll use different radio frequencies so that you can go thousands of miles rather than just, around the block, okay, because that's what you need to do for it to work. Yes?
Is there any location on the net you could recommend where these issues are
Do a search on Ethereum. 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 There's a plate that's one of the watering holes for this whole public internet infrastructure thing. Okay. There are a number of people just sort of that are trying to do this in terms of secure, open source internet boxes. Okay, that they're out there. And my giving this talk is to make you aware of that, and like you, just search on one of these things and then tell your friends. That's how revolutions start. Okay? One more.
Hear his question, but I think you answer my, is this Ethereum sort of organization, a way to access this? That's what I was.
Ethereum is a group that's trying to recast the internet so that it's our internet rather than somebody else's internet. No, it's like a forum, like on Facebook or some of the other thing, where you get a bunch of like-minded people that are together saying, "Hey, we want to do something for real," and projects get assigned, people execute the projects, hardware gets built. That's what's going on. Huh? Forming a forum, a community, a message board.
Okay. Well, my question to you now then stands. You're putting apps out there. You've got all these other people. You've got a sea of people on this Darknet, and whatever they're putting out there, how do you find it? How do you do it? How do you organize it? I can't even find a TV channel, let alone what you're talking about.
Like anything, it starts with the community, your local community, okay? You just start asking questions, and somebody will answer, okay, out there, you know? That's the way it works. I mean, you're here, you've heard this. If you ask questions based on what little you may have comprehended of my talk, you know, and just keep asking questions about it, you'll turn up things. Use the Google, okay? You know? You'd be surprised what you'll find there. Okay, if you just say public internet, grassroots internet. Grassroots internet is a good search term. Okay? Any other questions? Yes?
It strikes me that you could make exactly the same argument with the highway system in America, that it was highly restrictive, very concrete, in very literal sense. It doesn't do everything that we want it to do. But at the same time, every single one of us here arrived to this location via the highway system. And likewise, there is a certain infrastructure that is necessary in order to provide the internet that we use on our daily affairs. I frankly am less concerned about the fact that the internet is becoming concretized, and I'm much more concerned about the fact that there are motions in play that are sifting out the information that we provide over the internet and using it as a means of categorizing what type of person we are. We took the highway analogy and we found that a system was being developed where only people of a certain race could use a certain highway, or only certain people with a certain viewpoint could use the highway. I would be much more concerned about that. And those are my concerns relative to the internet, not the fact that it has been concretized into a form that is frankly useful.
I have to cede the floor to the next speaker. I share your concerns, okay? Because you've all heard about the surveillance state. You live in it. It's worse than you can imagine. It is worse than you can imagine. If you want to have an idea, there's a show on CBS called Person of Interest. Watch it, because it's not fantasy. Most of the stuff you see in Person of Interest is real. There is a machine, and it's watching you. You know, the show starts out, you know, the government has a machine, and you are being watched. That's true. If anything, all the news stories that, you know. So I share your concern, but how we fight that, that's a talk for a different day. Thank you very much.